Hi, my name is Mike Beliveau, and today we're going to hop in the Wayback Machine with Mr. Peabody and Sherman, and we're going to travel back to the golden age of TV westerns. And specifically, we're going to be visiting Gunsmoke, the iconic western. And we're going to take a look at the guns used by Marshal Matt Dillon, as played by James Arness. Gunsmoke's 20-year run on television from 1955 until 1975 made it the longest-running Western TV series ever, at least American TV series. In fact, when it went off the air in 1975, it was the longest-running scripted series of all time on American television, though in the many years since, it's been eclipsed by a number of others, including The Simpsons and NCIS, and it now is number 8 on the list of longest-running scripted TV series of all time. Now, 6'7" James Arness played Marshal Matt Dillon, the protagonist of the show, for the entire 20 years of the series run. Obviously, a series that was on for 20 years had a lot of characters, both regular series characters and guest stars, and a lot of different guns were used, and that's too much territory for me to cover. So in this video, I'm going to concentrate on the guns used by Matt Dillon in the series, with one notable exception. At the very end of the video, after my sign-off, there's going to be a bonus clip. And that's going to show a rather unusual revolver for series television at the time, used by another series regular in one of the episodes. So if you're curious about that, stick around till the bitter end, or skip ahead through the magic of YouTube, whatever you prefer to do. But in the meantime, let's take a look at the guns used by Marshal Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke. Gunsmoke had one of the most iconic series intro scenes ever filmed. And it's highly memorable. Anyone who's seen the series will remember this, because it features Marshal Matt Dillon facing off against an unnamed bad guy dressed all in black across a dusty western street.
Starring James Arness as Matt Dillon.
So that intro ran for the whole 20 years, but it was filmed several times by necessity and just to update things, of course, because over 20 years, James Arness had aged a good bit. So the 1955 James Arness was not really looking like a very good match for the 1975 James Arness. And also, of course, the series went to color after the first few years, so they had to film then. But the original opener, the bad guy was a man named Arvo Ojala. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If not, I'm sure our Finnish viewers can correct me in the comments. But Arvo was a fast draw expert. And in fact, he coached most of the Hollywood stars in fast draw, because at the time, Hollywood was not history, let's say, and gunfights featured those classic shootouts across Main Street, where the two participants had to draw from the leather as fast as possible and get off basically an unaimed shot that would take down the other guy. I'm not going to say that never happened in history, but it would have been pretty rare. But on series television, it happened all the time. It's like once an hour, pretty much every night of the week when westerns were the thing. So Arvo coached many of the movie stars and TV stars in the art of fast draw.
Hello, Johnny.
Okay, now you might say, well, that was all right, but I've seen faster. Look closely. He's not doing that fast draw with a 4 3/4 inch barrel Colt Peacemaker. He's doing that with an original Walker Colt. Okay? That gun weighs over 4 pounds. Watch another shot.
And this trailer? Hey, for you, Lucy, honey.
And he was also a master leather worker. And he made quite a few of the fast draw holsters of the time. And he's one of the guys who pioneered the metal reinforced, steel reinforced holsters that would hold their shape, be very rigid, and allow for a lightning fast draw, even if they did not allow for fantastic gun retention. And many of the Western stars used his holsters. And certainly James Arness used one of his holsters in Gunsmoke. Now, in that famous intro scene, you can clearly see the stag-gripped 7.5-inch barreled Colt Peacemaker that Matt Dillon wields in Gunsmoke. And this was a weapon that he used in every episode of the series except one. So he was known for that 7.5-inch stag-gripped Peacemaker. But there was one episode that was different. That episode was in the first season, and the title of the episode was Hack Prine. And it was the 26th episode aired in the first season. But the funny thing about it is, it was actually the first episode filmed because that was the pilot of the TV show Gunsmoke. And it's quite different from the 25 episodes that come before it, because it was the pilot. It was shot on an entirely different set for Dodge City than the set that became standard for the Gunsmoke series. And rather than a 7.5-inch barreled Colt Peacemaker, Marshal Dillon in that Hack Prine episode was wielding a 4 3/4-inch gunfighter length Colt Peacemaker.
Well, let's go. Let's see what happens. No.
And that's the only episode that he used that short barrel Colt in. And, you kind of wonder at some of the changes that they made between the pilot and the actual series. And sometimes I wonder if they didn't go away from that 4 3/4-inch Colt to the 7.5-inch Colt because of James Arness's gigantic size. At 6'7", that 4 3/4-inch Colt looked like a little toothpick in his hand. I think maybe because he was so big, the showrunners thought it would be a better look for him to have a gun that was more in proportion with his size. Now, I'm just guessing about that, but for whatever reason, they made a fantastic choice because that gun is iconic. During the age of TV westerns, a lot of the guns used, though admittedly in quite a few series, there was a signature gun that they tried to have or something different about the protagonist. Johnny Yuma in Wanted Dead or Alive used a cut-down rifle called a mare's leg, like a handgun. And Chuck Connors, of course, uses rapid shooting, a Model 1892 Winchester. My tongue got ahead of my brain there. Johnny Yuma was not Wanted Dead or Alive. Johnny Yuma was the rebel. The character in Wanted Dead or Alive was Josh Randall, as played by the great Steve McQueen. So sorry I messed that up. So there were identifiable guns, and that seemed to be something that the studios like to do. But for the most part, the guns were pretty anonymous rentals. And a lot of them were actual 19th century Colts that the prop houses bought up cheap back in the day, and they had been abused in making movies for the last 40 years. So a lot of them were actually in pretty rough shape. It's kind of rare, not unknown, for the stars to use their personal guns in TV series. Though a lot of them did, but they didn't use them all the time because TV series could be very rough on guns. what with drop your guns, mister, and that Colt hits the ground, right? So if it's your personal gun, you're not too crazy about that. As it turns out, we know a fair amount about the actual guns used by James Arness in Gunsmoke. And one of the reasons that we know that is because they were provided by Stembridge's prop rental house, gun rental house. And Stembridge was very famous as a gun rental house of the movie industry. It was located on the Paramount lot and was in business for many years. But in 2007, Stembridge basically was going out of business and was going to auction off their guns. And, I should point out that by 2007, the availability of Italian clones from companies like Uberti were very prevalent and very easy to come by. And they were actually much cheaper than real Colts. And companies like Stembridge's that had bought, literally thousands of first generation Colts and some second generation Colts as well, their rental inventory was worth a fortune. Even in 2007, those guns were worth like $2,000 a piece if they were in fair condition, if they were in pristine condition or had something fancy about them, or they were, they could document them to a TV show. They were worth a great deal. And it was to the advantage of the prop houses financially to sell them off and replace them with Italian clones, which could be had for a couple $100, wholesale price at the time. So, they were basically selling a $2,000 gun and replacing it with a $200 gun. So there was a lot of that going on, which was a good time to be a collector when those guns were flooding the market. But we know about the guns used on Gunsmoke because the Stembridge Western guns were all bought at auction by one man. They were bought by Robert Peterson, who was the chairman of Peterson Publishing. And they made magazines that I know you're going to recognize, like Guns and Ammo and Peterson's Hunting. And Peterson was a billionaire. And he had a dream for decades of opening a firearms museum in Los Angeles, which is where Peterson Publishing was located. And he pitched that to the city of Los Angeles numerous times. And because they were dominated by gun-hating liberals, and I'm not saying this just out of politics, this is just the truth, they rejected his proposal to build a museum every time he put it in. So he thought, with LA's relationship and history with Hollywood movies, that if he added a Hollywood wing to the museum, that might be the thing that got the LA City Council to say, yes, you may build it. So he bought the Stembridge's collection, their Western guns, and others as well, but he pretty much bought out all their Old West stuff. And when he looked it over, he was kind of disappointed because he didn't realize in what doggy shape a lot of that stuff was. It's kind of funny. You look at the stuff in movies, and for instance, they would have, a scoped rifle, right, for the movies, and the scope would have no glass in it because the glass would reflect back into the camera. But if you took the glass off, you didn't notice that the glass wasn't there. You just thought you were looking through clear glass. So, the prop houses did a lot of things like that made the guns kind of non-functional for the real world. And of course, a lot of them had been used very heavily. And Peterson was a billionaire. I mean, he was used to the absolute finest in everything, including guns. What Peterson did was he hired a guy named Al Frisch. And Al Frisch was a well-known collector and dealer in movie and television firearms. That was his thing. So he hired Al on a 6-week contract to go through the guns that Peterson had just bought and to go through all of Stembridge's related paperwork and to find the significant guns with real good Hollywood provenance that would be interesting to collectors. So in 6 weeks, which was not enough time, Al went through probably a couple of thousand of the guns, and he was able to locate several hundred that had really good provenance for movies or television. And among those were a half a dozen single action Colt Army revolvers, 7.5-inch guns that were used on Gunsmoke and could be documented to use in the series. So we know quite a bit about the guns Matt used, that he used at least 6 Colts and at least 1 Great Western revolver during the series Gunsmoke. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering, Peterson made his pitch with the Western wing on the museum, and the city of LA said, no thanks, go away. At the time, Peterson was 80, and he did not live much longer after that disappointment, and his heirs did not continue the fight to get a museum. It wasn't their passion project. So we never got the Peterson Firearms Museum. Luckily, we've got the Autry Heritage Center in LA. But Peterson died disappointed in that regard, sorry to say. Now, the guns fresh found that were documented to Gunsmoke were kind of interesting because a lot of them had wooden or hard rubber grips on them. In fact, most of them. But we know that the gun that James Arness used had faux stag grips on it. And those grips were plastic grips made by Franzite. And, originally, I thought that they might have taken the same grips and swapped them from gun to gun. And the reason I thought that was because if you look at this Great Western 2, where the Franzite grips fit perfectly, beautiful fit. And then you look at this Colt Single Action Army, both of which were used by James Arness in Gunsmoke. You see these huge gaps by the frame. The grips don't fit well at all. So I assumed that they just took it off of the Great Western and put it on the Colt, and the grip frames weren't exactly the same. And they might indeed have done that in some cases, but looking at enough pictures, you can see that even though the pattern of the lines in the grip is the same, the color's a little bit different, different things are different. And what I discovered in researching these Franzite grips is that the reason a lot of stars used them, and this is something that I discovered in an interview that Roy Rogers gave, because Roy Rogers talked about going to these Franzite grips, which, he didn't like because they were plastic, but I think he had originally had ivory, real ivory on his personal guns. But he said the reason that he and a lot of the others went to these Franzite grips was because they only cost $5 a piece. And movies were very hard on gun grips. Like I said, raise your hands and drop your guns, or drop your guns and raise your hands. And bang, gun goes down to the deck, right? He said a lot of grips broke during the process of filming. He said if that happened with a set of real pearl or real ivory grips or real stag grips, you felt really bad. And even if it happened with a set of wood grips or hard rubber grips, it was not often the work of an instant to get them replaced, right? So what the studios did is they bought up a bunch, huge pile, of these Franzite grips. They looked okay, particularly in the low resolution of TV. And, generally, nobody's getting a close-up of the grips or a close-up of the gun unless it's in your hand shooting, and then the grips are covered, right? So it's just when it was in the holster, something nice to see. So they bought all these Franzite grips, and when a set broke, which happened quite a bit, they just unscrewed them and screwed another set on and went right back with the filming. And that's why you see these faux stag grips on a lot of the guns out there, and why you see also they did the same thing with faux ivory, just white plastic, and you'll see that on lots of TV guns. And of course, you know, when we were kids, we thought they were real. Ooh, ivory grips, or those Franzite grips, you know, oh, stag grips. And in fact, I'm willing to bet, because I know that I was like that a lot of the people in my generation who grew up watching those Westerns ended up with a completely erroneous conception of what real stag grips should look like, because we thought those were real stag, right? And then when you see real stag, they don't look anything like that, really not, you know, the bark is inconsistent, and it's quite different. And at first you think, if you're raised on Franzite grips, you think, oh gosh, I wish I could find those good stag grips. You know, as it turns out, of course, they were just cheap plastic. So most of the original Colts did not start off with those Franzite grips, and the grips were replaced for the original grips after filming. So a lot of those had the original wood or hard rubber gutta-percha type grips on them. I mentioned Great Western revolvers, and Great Westerns started to be manufactured in 1955 because Colt had stopped manufacturing the single-action Army after World War II. And, you know, the Great Western craze, there was a huge desire for them. So the Great Western was born, and there were a couple of others, the Atomic and a couple of other different things, but by far the Great Western was the most popular and the best of them. And a Great Western was used by James Arness, at least one, and it was a fairly nice one. And the way we can tell is by the trigger guard, because the trigger guard on a Great Western is more oval in shape than the trigger guard on an actual Colt single-action Army, as you can see in these pictures. So, you know, we know that Great Westerns were used. We don't know how many, and we know at least 6 Colt single-action Armies were used during the filming of the series. Now, in the series, most of the gunplay, and this was the case with most of these Western series, except for the Rifleman and Wanted Dead or Alive, most of the gunplay was accomplished with single-action Colts. But there were times when Marshal Dillon needed to use his long gun, and we're just going to talk about the long guns used, because there's a little controversy on this. The Internet Movie Database, which is generally a pretty good resource, states that James Arness used a model 1873 Winchester 4440 in Gunsmoke. Now, I'm here to tell you, I've been up and down through Gunsmoke, and I cannot find a model 1873. The closest I can come is one time with a model 1866 Yellow Boy. But for the most part, James Arness used model 1892 Winchesters, just like every other cowboy series of the era. And, you know, we can clearly see when we've got this shot inside his marshal's office, model 1892s on the wall and a model 1892 in his hand. So that was the predominant rifle that was used on Gunsmoke. To be honest with you, given the era that it was filmed, I would have been shocked to see him using anything else. So it would have been incredibly cool. And there are other series, like Bonanza, that I'll probably talk about in the future, where they made a real effort, at least for a time, to be historically accurate. So eventually, for some reason, I just gave that up and became totally Hollywood. But Bonanza has some interesting guns, and I'll cover those in a future video. But Marshal Dillon used his 1892 in the presumably the 1870s. That seems to be when this one was supposed to be set, just like everybody else in the TV West. Now, getting away from the TV guns for a minute, James Arness did own a personal single-action Army revolver. And it was very nice, nickel-plated, Colt 5.5-inch barreled gun, and he apparently had grips made for it. They're not factory grips. They appear to be walnut, and they are rather blocky. And maybe that's because his hand was about the size of a coal shovel, and he needed a thicker grip to just feel comfortable with the gun. I don't know. I'm just speculating there, because he certainly could have had as slender and well sculpted a grip as he would have wanted. So he must have chosen this grip because it fit his hand. So this is his personal gun, and Arvo also made him a personal hand tool holster for that gun, but it was never used in the series. Well, you know, I got so involved with Marshal Matt Dillon and his guns that I kind of got away from some of my historical correctness and put together a Marshal Matt Dillon homage rig. And this is a 7.5-inch barreled Great Western 2, which is a beautiful gun. In my case, they have real stag grips, not the Franzite grips. And though I did not get an Arvo Ojala holster, I got a period 1970 Bianchi model 1895 holster, which is very much like the holster that Arvo made for Matt Dillon. So I'll have some fun with this. So that's our look at the guns used by Marshal Matt Dillon in the TV series Gunsmoke. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do, right? Thumbs up, like it, share it with your friends, make a comment. All of that helps the channel, and I appreciate it. And until next time, bye. So for those of you who stuck around, as promised, here is the bonus clip. You know, in the 1950s and 1960s, it was very rare to see anyone with a handgun in a Western movie or TV show that was not a Colt single-action Army revolver. In fact, even shows about the Civil War would show, Civil War soldiers shooting Colt single-action Armies, sometimes even 5.5-inch Colt single-action Armies. I've even seen them with 92 Winchesters in Civil War movies that were Civil War transitioning into a Western type thing, you know, some of the John Wayne movies. So seeing somebody using a different gun that's historical is kind of a treat. And that happened in Gunsmoke. In Season 1, Episode 29, a character named Clem Maddow comes to Dodge City. As it turns out that he has a past with Doc Milburn Stone, and not a good one. And Doc Stone gets in a murderous rage and is going to kill him. And he enters the Long Branch wielding a Colt model 1851 Navy revolver. And he threatens to kill Clem. And it's clearly an 1851 Navy. And Marshal Matt Dillon talks him off of the ledge, basically, and sends him away with Clem still alive. But we got a good look at that 1851 Navy, and it was kind of a treat. So if you're looking at that episode, keep your eye open for the 1851. So hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time. Bye.